So thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to join us here at AQAV for the webinar. The topic today is much more popular than we expected it to be. We got a lot of registrations. It is, what is a good documentation policy and how can it benefit you? This is a topic that's very near and dear to my own heart, something that I enjoy working on and enjoy talking about quite a bit. I have found over the years that it's helped me quite a bit in my career and my personal life as well. So let's dive in and talk about what the topic is here today. Before we get too far down the road, I want to thank the sponsors that make these webinars possible. Today's webinar is being sponsored by AVI Systems, a member of the GPA Global Delivery Consortium, and by Shure, the microphone manufacturers that we all know and love so well. So thanks much to AVI and to Shure for sponsoring the event today. So let's jump in and talk about our outline. We're going to talk today about why having a good documentation policy is important, because that really does matter. We're going to talk about what may go into establishing one, and we'll find that that's different depending upon your needs and the profile of your business. We're going to talk about where it really applies within your business or your model. And of course, we want to talk about the value of it and what we get if we put the effort into creating and adhering to one. Once the framework's been created, the big thing is adoption. We need to know how we can get our colleagues, peers, and managers interested in adhering to this good practice. And continuous improvement, because everything must be polished and improved over time or it languishes. And last but not least, we're going to take a real honest look at things and say, hey, is all of this effort just more trouble than the return we're going to get from it? So let's jump in with that first point. Why is a good documentation policy important to us? Well, I like to start with definitions, because when we look at what the words really are and what they really mean, I think we can glean importance and an understanding of how and where to apply things from the very definition. And if we look at the definition of the word document, the root word in documentation, we see this very important bit of text I've highlighted in yellow here. A document is a piece of written, printed, or electronic matter that provides information or evidence, or that serves as an official record. It can be a lot of different forms. It can be called a lot of different things. It can be used in a verb tense as well, to record or to document an action or a history or a state. All of those things are applicable to a good policy. When we think about words like evidence or official records, it really does draw attention to why it's urgent that we pay attention and take great care in how we document things. Where do we find documentation in our business? Well, pretty much regardless of what your business is, if it's audiovisual in sales, service, support, or any variation even outside of audiovisual or UC, we see contracts. That's how we form business. That's how we execute and make sure that we have a binding commitment amongst each other. We see it in our scopes of work, the document that clearly records and delineates what is included in the job, the project, or the product for all parties. We see it in the functional narrative. That's the document that describes not only what the product or project is, but how it works and what the user experience is interfacing with it. We see it internal and external communications. These can be emails amongst each other within our own companies, external emails to customer, legal, procurement, any other entity outside of the company. Simple things such as internal messaging, texting, or IM. We see technical specifications, which we're often required to write, interpret, or apply. Drawings that have text in standard formats. Custom software code and configuration of firmware and software-based devices with non-fixed architecture, such as digital signal processors or codecs or even memory control software or editing software. We see it in the very simple and lowest level things, such as how we label files that we create and documents, Word, Excel, other documents, and how we store those within the folder structure and drive structure. And of course, we see it on invoices, which is what really matters in the end, because none of us do all of this work strictly for volunteer. Money exchanges hands, and the documentation of invoices and the information contained therein can be pivotal on whether or not we are paid and paid in full. Evidence of procedure of compliance is something that we focus on very carefully at AQAV. If we look at the AV 9000 checklists and testing records and output from those tests, how they are documented and controlled is extremely important. Reality is that no matter what your business, every aspect of the business will likely eventually be documented, whether that's a conversation, whether that's a requirements list, many things that transpire between people from spoken word to written text. So creating that good documentation process and maintaining it long term really becomes an essential step of protection against things like confusion or misinterpretation between parties, disenchantment or expectations not being met, error and rework due to improperly labeling or documenting or revisioning documents, lack of clarity, client dissatisfaction during or at the end of the project. Without proper documentation and documentation control, this can run rampant across the life of a product or a project. Litigation and loss in its most extreme form, even injury or harm if an operator manual or a user specification is not clearly captured and controlled, can result in physical injury or harm to the business, harm to the device, harm to the system. And all of that can culminate in monetary loss. We really must be beholden to the words we use, the way we control them, the way we share them, distribute them, label them, and maintain them. So what goes into establishing a good documentation process? Well, we can take a great lesson from the medical world where things may truly be life and death. If we look into the medical manufacturing arena, we see that there's very tight specifications for good documentation practice called GDoc-P in that arena. And that's a term where pharmaceutical and medical device industries describe standards by which their documents must be created and maintained. Now, this is not always codified by authorities, so it's not necessarily law, but it does require definition and compliance in order to be accepted in many arenas of work and in order to be compliant with quality delivery outlines. It's also designed as a system to prevent potential failure or potential injury or loss of life due to poor documentation or poor documentation control. This is probably the highest stricture that we will see in terms of good documentation. And if we look at that, we can really begin to understand how we can extract some good ideas to apply in our business, where it may not be life and death at every turn. So are we as strict in the audiovisual or UC or distribution business as that medical world is? Perhaps we should ascribe to be, but generally no. Our emphasis here in this presentation and in our discussion is around the word policy, a guideline set, rather than practice, which is a much more enforced and audited approach to these things within the medical realm. And if we look at the GDoc-P framework and we extract from it what makes sense for us, adopt it and adapt it, we can rapidly see where we can gain benefit. So when establishing one, I think the most important thing is to look at what is most impacting to you in your business and start there. There's a wide variety of areas of focus. I think that we don't do ourselves great service if we attempt to stop the train and create a pillar to post 100% page 1 to 1000 policy before we attempt to apply and adhere to it. We can gain incremental improvement and incremental protection by using bits and pieces as we go. So we really encourage you to look at your type of work, your own position, your business, your interfaces, and see what areas of focus will gain you the highest yield to start with. Some of those may be standard file naming conventions. We see wild variety of file naming when we've got various employees or various colleagues working on similar type situations. Simplifying down to a standard file name, foreshortened and defined, gains us a lot of extra speed in locating, searching, storing, and sanitizing those files. It's a very simple step, does not have to be elegant or mathematically complex. Just a standard that everyone ascribes to and therefore understands, regardless of whether they're looking at a file from a colleague that they know or their own stack or sharing in or outside of the company. Some policy on keeping the internal content of documents clear, concise, and complete. Those 3 C's are a foundation hallmark of AV 9000 and AQAV. We want to make sure that we give some guidelines to our colleagues and our employees to understand what does and doesn't belong in a communication. Excessive flowery words or treatment to a sentence that may change its meaning or add additional inferences that we don't intend. The 3 C's can really make things readable, much more interpretable, and much more discussable in the long term because we've removed a lot of extra words and extra confusion from the conversation. How you go about that for the way you do business and the things you document may vary, but definitely developing a policy of style in writing content is important. How we improve documents is also incredibly important. If we have a tiered approval structure from a draft version of a contract through to a final executable contract, or a base set of drawings or software versions through to a final release for build and construction, making an effort to document a standard and replicable way of approving those documents really does gain us a lot of good. Whether that's be a standard signature format, a reference signature library so that we can go back and see that physically signed documents were indeed signed by the person that is authorized and intended to approve them, and simple things like defining how we can make legible documents. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in a few upcoming points. Approval process is an incredibly important part of both continuous improvement, after action review, and of quality control. If we don't know who was handling a certain step of approval, if their handwriting is illegible, or if we don't have an e-doc that we can track them back to, if it's a field change or a field note, the signature really is of no value to us. Standard date and time formats, especially if you work with people outside of your immediate zone, or more importantly, in an international zone. I'm a big fan of 24-hour time and international date formats, but there's a lot of variations out there, some of which your company may be using in some areas, and you may wish to adopt and propagate throughout your immediate circle of colleagues. Communications and subject header standard formats. Has anyone ever received an email that says, "Hey, I hope you're well"? And that email is responded to several times about an internal or external topic regarding a project or a business aspect. And going back, the trail seems to wander all over the place. By having standard subject and header formats, it makes it far easier to sort things, to control things, and to understand in a very heavy digital information world what's important and relevant to the various parties who may be copied or passed the information. I'm sure each and every one of you have an ever overflowing inbox of emails, and just managing that and messaging is often a large part of our days. Those subject and header formats can help us call out things of a higher priority level. We can tie them to specific efforts, products, or projects, and allow us to better manage our time and information. Revision and notation standards. Having a policy on that is incredibly important. How many people have been caught with an old revision of drawings or, heaven forbid, an old firmware or software revision in the field? Oftentimes that's caught and repaired. Perhaps it may take time, perhaps it may take additional effort. How we record that for future learning, how we indicate the wrong revision and the right revision applied is really important. Little things like strike throughs versus complete obliteration of former data makes a very big difference in the audit and the continuous learning process, as well as understanding any type of specific failure points for correction in future actions. Understanding who the owner of that annotation was and that field chain is, who can go back and refresh us with the information specific to that instance so that we can work toward prevention or improvement is also very important. Doing that in a standard manner allows everyone to understand when it should happen, how it should happen, what it should look like, and what it should contain. Documentation storage, how we keep things, how long, how they're stored, whether it's physical and a digital copy, whether it's in multiple storage locations, how long the retention policy is, and what the maintenance on that data policy is. Incredibly important. And that falls into a good documentation policy. It's a peripheral area, not specific to the content or the format, but very important for the access standards. This is an area where your IT folks can be of a great help. They often have policies that they apply themselves, often behind the scenes to us end users, but would be happy to share with. One of the key things that I did when working toward our good documentation process and policy was working with IT to ensure that anything that I created and ratified would either enmesh with their current standards or was adopted and derived from things that they were already doing. Rather than reinventing the wheel and having to resize the axle, we worked hand in hand to make sure that my good documentation standards were ready to be easily slipped into their retention, maintenance, and protection. Header, footer, and page numbering standards. This seems incredibly unimportant, but can be life and death in the instance of litigation or any type of conflict around a contractual document. I know of a project once that went into an unfortunate litigation due to customer dissatisfaction, and the customer had purported that the contract wasn't delivered and the system was malfunctioning due to an error on the delivering person's part. When we went to the scope of work and the functional narrative, we found all of the specifications that safeguarded against the situation that had happened. And we found that the person who was delivering the system was indeed within all of the promises they had made within the contract and scope, and that the issue was an external influence and not within their control. That would not have had the teeth to stand up in the court litigation that it was reviewed under had we not had signature initials on every page of the contract, postscript storage of the contract, page numbering, and document delimiters. Without those things, it's an open conversation as to what was added, not added, included, and there's a much deeper dive into the exchange of the original documents, many of which were sent back and forth with red lines, alterations, updates, and change orders over a 2-year period. This is good housekeeping stuff, but without definition, we have no reason to believe that everyone will apply it or apply it in the same way, which is what makes it valuable in a good documentation policy. Standard meeting notes are another area where we can really help ourselves with a format, simple, useful, and historical. This clears confusion about the discussion back and forth that may have taken place between 2 or 20 people on a call like we are on today, where ideas were being exchanged rapidly, feedback was given quickly. It creates a memory of the call's content, and it allows us to reference that in the future as well as distribute immediately and get any type of revisions that may have been misconstrued during the call. Oh no, I thought I said that, or what I meant and heard were. Now, this is more of a good uh, arm stretching practice for general communications, but it falls under that good documentation policy if we standardize it and use it with rigidity. This is something that I use to ease my own burden on a daily basis. I take many, many calls on many projects, many different areas, and without those call notes in a very simple standard form, I would have a much, much higher risk of under delivering on promises or on responses that I may have made. Complaint and preventive action documents, a Kappa process. This is an almost direct and actually may be a direct derivative from that GDocP. So when we receive a complaint or a systemic failure or a repetitive failure or a one-time failure, having a process, documentation set, and standard methodology for recording all of that information, the subsequent investigation of cause, and the ultimate remedy, along with the preventive action to ensure it doesn't occur again, in a standard format increases our efficiency and decreases our potential loss in an amazing amount. We often trust that things are a one-time instance, or that won't happen again, or I think now we know better, we shouldn't need to revisit that. But without documentation in our daily busy lives, or as new colleagues and new interfacing partners and new customers come and go, that knowledge is often lost from our soft memory if it's not recorded in some durable format. Where can we apply all of these things? Well, we've talked a little bit about that today, but the real answer is anywhere you can. So I apply these in most of my communications on a daily basis, the simple, what I call housekeeping aspects. I try to keep all of my communications crisp, clear, concise, and complete. I try to make sure that I label all of my emails and all of my documents in that same logical date format with the same logical and searchable, concise header. This may be applied in accounting. It may be applied in sales, in engineering. The real answer is it should be applied everywhere if you really want to leverage it as an organization, department, or beyond. The more commonalities we see, the reduction in confusion, the reduction in, hey, I got this email, what are you trying to say? Or where did you put that file and what was it caused? Those daily degradations of our productivity add up mightily over time. And again, our friends in IT, in your IT support, your data retention, your network control are very, very experienced with this. They are replete with policies on things such as data retention, data deletion, how their service model revs are labeled, how they roll out new services, how they beta test it, and how they field release it. They have a great deal of mature information because of the importance and the amount of integrity required to be in that field. The other thing that I have found is with IT, it's much easier to synchronize into the information technology model than it is to interface with it with something radically different. So you may need to shift your labeling or shift your location around or shift or modify things just a little bit in order to make it ingest better into the long-term storage or the knowledge database or the document recovery system. But it's absolutely worth the effort to ensure that you're synchronized at that point. Much easier to do on the front end than after the documents have been created in a standard that's not so easily researched or ingested. How can we benefit from all of this? Well, we've been hinting at it along the way, but I think to say it very plainly, consistent, standard, organized documentation throughout your organization, no matter what it is, really does immediately increase our efficiency. It removes confusion. It removes interpretation time because we're seeing things again and again and they make sense. We all know a bird when we see it. We never think it's a whale. It increases the resiliency of the document, meaning that the document doesn't degrade from misuse or doesn't subject itself to misinterpretation or mishandling. Definitely increases security because we're including clear, concise, complete information, and we're managing the document labels, the document headers, the document handling, policies around distribution can help. Who gets to see what and how that's distributed through electronics means. We don't want the wrong information to get in someone's hands. We definitely don't want an old revision or a wrong revision or an aged document to get into production. And all of that goes toward increasing the quality of the organization immediately. I can't say these three words enough. I'm thinking about a tattoo. Clear, concise, and complete content really does reduce confusion and that time spent explaining or interpreting things. I see so many jokes about this meeting could have been an email. And it's funny. We laugh about it. But in reality, a lot of meetings really could be emails or document exchanges if we were better at how we did it. If we look at the content and the interactions of a lot of meetings that I know I sit in on a daily basis, so much of that is really establishing a common understanding of very basic rudimentary facts about what we're talking about. And if we can get past that, especially internally, by setting up standards and ground rules, really focusing on content and making sure it's applicable and then easily interpreted, we can reduce the amount of time spent in those meetings or reading, rereading, and asking questions about existing documents many-fold. Standard labels, titles, headers speed the identification of the relevant information. It really makes it fast to get it back, to know where we put it, to know where it was put 3 years ago when the project ended and the help desk needs to go sort through a million files to find it. All of these things are relatively low impact, low effort. It just takes a thoughtful and decisive action to decide to do it. That consistency and clarity together create documents that can prevent or that are defensible should some type of conflict or litigation occur. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. It's a difficult thing, communication. No matter what the business is, generally the most difficult thing in the business is making sure that expectations are clearly defined, that the information is clearly exchanged, and that the delivery completely happens. By having consistency and clarity and a good policy, handling all of those documents throughout all those various phases as cleanly and as efficiently as possible, we've definitely set ourselves up for success and close any potential gaps that may down the road lead to any type of untoward action. And it's really simple in my world. I believe that good standards lead to good habits. The more we do a good, fast, effective thing, the gooder and faster it gets. Those good habits create muscle memory, very much like playing a sport or an instrument. They become something we don't have to think about, a standard date level, a label, or making sure that we've constructed a clear communication. And muscle memory leads to speed in the process. And everybody can use more time back in their day, and speed gives us that time. When you combine speed with quality, it's an incredibly powerful combination. So, how do we get people to do this? Well, for myself personally, it started with me a lot of years ago. I went to see a presentation, not like this one, but that touched on what we would call good housekeeping of standards. And it really made me recognize how inconsistent I was in my own performance. Now, I wasn't doing things that didn't make sense, but they didn't always make sense to people other than me. I was very casual in my style. Um, I was consistent, but I didn't have an identifiable approach to doing these things. And it really sparked something in me to do things better, to focus on that continuous improvement area. Now, your situation is going to be different than mine, and mine's different than anyone else's at some level. But if we take this fundamental overview and apply it, I think the commonalities that we talk about here at the higher level of a good process or a good documentation policy really does help us to create a common set of format. Start with your organizational manager, not manger. IT department, I know that we've talked about them a lot, but I cannot give them enough credit. They really are on the ball when it comes to standards. Or your leadership team. Throw them a pitch and explain to them why you think it's important. These are the lower level sections of our daily work that we don't always think about. Seek out those policies that may already be existing within your organization or team. A lot of times things are created, they're released, and they're not very well adopted. Sometimes they go dormant, sometimes they just don't get off of the ground at all, and use them. And if it's possible, you may want to improve on them from where they sit. That can make a powerful start and put you way down the path towards success by adopting something that the company has already ratified, even though it may not be using it. And one of the biggest things that I found personally is to be an example. Good habits really do spread quickly. I've seen over the years that just using my standard date formats or standard meeting minutes formats, that over time, colleagues and people that I interface with will often start to reflect some of those things back toward me in the companies where we didn't have a specific policy. They would see it and it would make sense. Sometimes I would see things come back that look a little like mine, but better. And I would adopt those. And we would grow it brick upon brick until we got to the point where we all sat down and said, hey, there is value in this. Let's formalize the effort, put together the best of all of what we know, and create a standard that we can all agree and adhere to. The big thing I would caution everyone about, though, is to recognize that change is slow. It usually takes 3 times of hearing something that you want to learn to really retain it effectively. So if you're talking to somebody that just isn't interested in good documentation policy or practice, it may take a few more than that, but be persistent. Show through your behavior, show through the benefit, and show through some corrective coaching how it can really help them in their specific position. In worst case, I've worked places over the last 30 years where they just weren't interested in it. My manager didn't see the value, or the company was busy focusing on other areas, and that was their direction, and I recognized it. But I kept my good habits, and I continually attempted to refine them and pull them along. Eventually, I got into a position where I was able to apply them and influence the companies um, at times, and that was very fulfilling for me. But regardless, I keep those skills, those muscle memories I developed for myself, both in my professional and personal life, no matter where I'm working or communicating or documenting. and show people the results. Don't force it on them. Don't mandate unless you're in a position where you need to, but show them the benefit of what you're doing. People do believe what they see, and sometimes the smallest thing can show a great gap between the status quo and a little bit better. Sometimes a little bit better yields us a lot more good. And by helping people recognize the value in that, hey, we almost sent this device into the field with 3.2.1 firmware, but in the checklist, the technician found it, struck it out, wrote us a note with his name and signature of affidavit saying that it had been up to 3.2.5. And now we've made a corrective action process to make sure that doesn't happen in the field again. Now that tech could have just as easily updated the firmware and said, oh, they missed that. I'll just fix it and we'll be fine. How many more times in the field would it have taken before it had been caught, corrected, and prevented? Being consistent is key. Take those good habits with you. I use them in my own personal life to document things that occur. I use them on a daily basis. I really don't think about them much anymore. It has become very much muscle memory. I do think about my date format standard though, because I write almost everything in 24-hour time as habit because I work internationally quite a bit. And my wife really loathes the 24-hour format. She doesn't like doing that little bit of math, and she will always tell me, I wish you wouldn't do that when I slip up and put it on a personal communication. It's a funny little interchange between us, but it reminds me I just don't think about how I do those basic things anymore. So once you've written your policy and put all your standards into place and trained, if you're fortunate enough to influence those around you, you're done, right? No. I mean, things do need to be monitored and change as change occurs. One of my favorite musicians of all time and lyricists, philosophers, Neil Peart. And I do strongly believe, and it's taken me a long time to apply this to my professional life, that changes are not permanent, but change definitely is. It's going to keep happening, and we need to keep happening with it. So don't lock yourself into a creation around policies that may have become aged. Your policies are going to need to change as your organization, personnel, line of work, interfacing partners change and grow. Everything, I believe everything can be improved with the benefit of time and experience. So monitor and adjust as required. Now here's the question of the hour. And I've been asked this many, many times by many, many people about many, many things. You want to do the calculation for that load factor? I mean, is it worth it? Don't you know? You really want to spend time worrying about file label standards? Is it worth it? Well, I've never seen an instance where doing the right thing wasn't worth it when it was as simple as what it takes to have good documentation policy. Being consistent in those little things that don't take a huge amount of effort or time will yield us great returns. Maybe not immediately. Maybe it's incrementally. Or maybe it's that one giant time that if you hadn't done it that way, you might have wound up in court or hurt somebody. But it will absolutely give you return. Now, every aspect of this that we've talked about and all aspects of this documentation policy concept may not apply perfectly to your organization. You may not make another 4% profit next year because you did this. So look at where it does make sense. Look at where there are consistent sore spots, where there's consistent time sinks, where there's consistent confusion or rework. And think about how improving and stating your good documentation policy may be able to help those things. Often that is because it's a reduction of effort and a reduction of time around that effort. See where you're going to get the biggest win for the smallest investment. Quality is very much contagious in my experience. Once you start doing things and you start showing progress, people generally want to be part of that success. And you can start a movement. Remember to adjust those policies as necessary. And continuous improvement is not always building or adding. Continuous improvement sometimes is slimming down and deleting, reducing effort because you're not seeing the return expected. Not every little bit of dust in the house causes a sneeze. Focus on the areas that you're going to get the greatest return on. And this is a really big one. If you're challenged by somebody in the discussion around standards, or if you're challenging yourself to say, is the level of effort I need to invest into this documentation policy worth it? Determine the cost of failure if you don't apply it. If you don't put an initial signature on all the pages of the scope of work, and the client comes back later and sues you on a $3 million project, did you save enough money by not putting the initial signatures on each page to offset that money? If someone appends an incorrect page to a document because you didn't have a stop limiter or an end of document, if someone falsely signs a document, a name other than theirs to speed it through the process, and a quality failure occurs because of that, and you were unable to reference the signature to an exemplar signature in your signature database to prove the correct person signed it, what type of loss or litigation might that open you up to? This is not applicable to everything. Selling envelopes exclusively, you probably won't run into much life and death. But if you hang things over people's heads or run electric through wires or make holes in walls or put rails on high places, it really does pay to do the basics and do them both replicably in a standard manner and do them faithfully. There's an analogy I like to make when someone's challenging my desire to do something what I feel is the right way, to calculate the amount of output off a speaker array, even though we all really believe it's going to work just fine, or to determine how many newtons of force are on the end of that mounting arm off the wall, even though we've done it that way a lot of times and it should work. I always say, well, we could save 5, 7 minutes. We could save 4 hours not doing that. And I go to think and I say, if the CEO of a hospital said, how much money could we save on soap and water if those surgeons didn't wash their hands before every procedure? Now, there's definitely an offset there. Some people are going to get infections and sue. Some people are probably going to perish. But maybe, just maybe, we'll save enough money in soap and water that we can defend all those cases and put a couple extra dollars in the bank. Now, that's a ludicrous example, but it's amazing how applicable it is. So many of these things that we're talking about doing in a good documentation policy really do come down to hand washing. And I know that most of you, like me, wouldn't work in the garden and make a sandwich without running some good tap water and a nice bar of soap over that dirt that we've accumulated and the germs and contaminations. Why wouldn't we give that same due care and attention to our daily work life? When we think about what we do most that lives longest within an organization, that often comes back to being documentation. Even after we've moved on or gone to a new area of our career, to a new employer, to retirement, what we created in that time can still influence people well beyond the duration of our employment. So I think it does demand the respect and care of defining and adhering to a good policy. Who gets something out of this? Well, everybody does. I mean, our customers are king, right? If we're doing things better, faster, stronger, more correct, then they're going to benefit from that. There's no doubt about it. Speed means that we can sell it to them at a better price and still maintain our operating profit. Speed means we can do more work for them. Quality means less rework, which means we can get off the site and let them use the system or use the product faster. It's all good. The company you work for, the organization, is going to benefit. because your time is precious and money. And we know we're going to create efficiencies and give you time back throughout the day. And you benefit from it. Us, the individual, benefits from it. Not only in a pride of work, but I might get another 7 minutes of sleep at night, knowing that I ran all my checklists, I used all my standard headers, I was clear and concise and complete, and I won't lie awake thinking about that contract that I wrote. A few examples that'll fly in here of what we're talking about. These are not the way to do it. There is no one way to do it, but this is a good example of what some good habits kind of look like and how simple we can start. Each and every one of these things is a moment of attention. And it's only attention in that moment until we've developed that muscle memory that we know will come. And after that, it becomes habit. I always like to make the analogy that the fastest way to success is through a known path. That's kind of like going out and getting the mail from the mailbox. You can walk down the front steps, go out across the sidewalk, and pull the mail from the box and retrace back to the front door. You could also just wander around aimlessly until your path hopefully leads you to the mailbox. You could take a much more difficult path and intercept the mail on its way. There's a lot of ways to get to the end of documentation, communication, storage, and all the things we talked about here. But not all of them are very predictable as that straight walk down the paved known path of shortest distance. And muscle memory guides us to and from that box every day, whistling a tune or watching the neighbor's dog behind the fence. Becomes something we don't have to put brain power toward because we're already using that brain power elsewhere. So no matter where you begin, how you start it, a good documentation policy, as little as it may be, or as expansive as it grows, can have an immediate effect on your results, personally, professionally, interface, internal, and external. I really hope you gained a little something and enjoyed today's presentation. We try to make it fun. We try to make it real about people and not just theories. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do at AQAV, the Association for Quality and Audiovisual, you can send an email to our superstar admin, Irene, at admin@aqav.org. She is the lifeblood of the organization and responsive as can be in good form. You can check us out online at AQAV.org. You can see about the certifications that we teach and test to there and the AV9000 checklists and standard for quality. We're going to put the recording of this event up along with the other webinars on the AQAV channel on YouTube. You can search right there. That's really easy to find. And my last order of business before I open it up for any questions or comments is again to thank our sponsors. I want to thank AVI Systems, a member of the GPA, Think Global and Act Global, covering the world for audiovisual and UC communications. Ensure Brothers, that legendary performance of the venerable SM58, 57, and every other modern technological advance they've made. Wonderful partners. We thank them both so much for making this webinar possible and helping to fund our efforts here. So Irene, if you'd like to take questions maybe in chat or raise hands, we'll be happy to take questions or comments if there are any.
Sounds good to me.
Folks, I think you can unmute yourselves. If not, pop in the chat and let us know you'd like to ask your question verbally, or just print the in the chat there and Irene will read it out for us, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Okay, question from Neil. Is there a project management software you use?
We do not. I want to really be careful to not ascribe to any products in this presentation. There's a lot of good answers out there for that particular software. We do use one internal to my company. I don't want to name it here, but I would say to look around and compare the base features of what's out there. If I could give advice on project management software, I would give the advice that by far the easiest way to keep standard and to keep most effective interface is to use something that works in concert or is an addition to your invoicing and quotation software. Something that tracks directly through there is a very powerful tool. And there's a lot of really good options out there.
Pablo is asking if this is our first webinar. Bill has also done the eliminating punch list. And we're hoping to make these webinars a monthly possibility. We're still looking for people to provide content. If anybody on the call is interested in working with us, we'd be interested in hearing your pitch.
Yeah, and check out that YouTube channel. We've got the past webinars from myself and several other colleagues up there. AQAV is a volunteer organization. We're a not-for-profit. We're focused on quality assurance. So we train against quality testing, checklisting, and good habits. We don't teach you how to do things because there's a lot of ways to do things. And the wonderful education partner of VIXA out there is definitely the leading authority on how to. AQAV is the how to make sure you did and how to ensure that you did things correctly. So we don't ascribe to specific softwares or platforms or things like that, more to thought processes, constructs, in our own internally developed AV 9000 ISO compatible checklist.
Any additional questions? That looks like it's all good. Oh, wait, hold on. Can we look to create creating short micro training videos, 10 to 15 minutes, that we can put out to our team regularly? Mike, if you could let us know exactly what kind of micro trainings you're looking at, we can certainly put it to the board for a vote as to see if we're able to do this.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your questions and what is of interest to you. Absolutely. We want to make these trainings and webinars as relevant and as useful as possible.
Thank you, Andrew. And he said outstanding content. Again, anybody on the call, if they have any content that they would like to see us present, we would very much love to hear what you have to say. You can email us at admin@aqav.org, or and anything that we can try to do to move forward with this is greatly appreciated, and we'll do the best that we can.
And if questions bubble up as you go throughout your day, because I know now I've planted the seed of good documentation policy, don't hesitate to reach out to the admin email, and Irene will relay any type of questions, concerns, or feedback that you have over to me, and I promise I will answer them in good kind. We love to take good quality discussions even further. This is a volunteer effort for me. I take no money for any of this, nor do any of the board members. We're passionate about doing things correctly for our customers, our companies, and ourselves. So we're always engaged. Happy to hear feedback and happy to take the conversation to the next level to try to help you become part of the movement.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Tom. We appreciate your feedback.
All right, with that, I think we'll give you the 5 minutes back in your day. See how efficient we were? I didn't even rehearse this thing and we got it done in less time. I really do want to thank everybody for spending lunch with me and having a listen. We thank you so much. Bid you to have a wonderful rest of your day, week, and life. Be safe, and we hope to see you down the road.
Take care.